you say, just to note. Okay, thanks for that. Can we go to Councillor Arthur, please?
Thank you. Thanks for this report. I think, obviously this is an area where, finances are really stretched. And as Councillor Corbett said, I think it is a really important area. I really do think small things matter. And I think how we manage our green space really sets a tone for our communities. So I think it's really important. So I've got 3 questions. If you don't mind, I'll just ask them one at a time. The first one's probably quite straightforward, and that's around the use of quad bikes on footpaths to clear the weeds. So the Council has a policy of reducing the use of herbicides. And my understanding from previous reports, that was about really targeting where the spray is laid down. The use of quad bikes suggests that perhaps we're just going to, go along a pavement and spray it quite merrily. Is there a policy or a position on that?
No, only on a very heavily infested area would they do that. There's on-off switches that they're going in, they're targeting the weeds, because the herbicide we use is a contact herbicide. It only works when it actually touches the green part. So there is a bit of an experiment going on here as well, just how well the operators actually do that. The first week of operation would indicate that they are carrying that out just by the amount of herbicide that's been used in the first week. Our initial research into this showed that you tend to use less using quad bikes. When we went to other cities, they were using less. And we are looking at future quad bikes that may have an infrared sensor that would actually sense where the weed was and then switch on the spray. That's the hope.
Okay, thanks very much.
So thanks for that. That's reassuring, actually. So that's really good. But if you're looking for heavily infested areas, of course, I would invite you to come to my ward. So sticking with the weeds topic, last week we had a walkabout in my ward with Mike Avery came along, and also Andrew Kerr was there. And that forced me to reflect back on the fact when we spoke about weeds at Tech last year, there was this belief that over the winter we're going to clear a lot of the detritus from our footpaths that forms a growth medium quite often for weeds. And what I see in my ward, Buxton Terrace, which is quite near where I live, there's still huge amounts of basically dirt on the footpath. We were in Oxgangs last week with Mike Avery and Andrew Kerr, right through Oxgangs Road North. There's just a huge amount of basically debris, collected on the footpaths, beside traffic islands, etc. And it doesn't really seem that in my area, my ward, much has really happened in terms of uplifting that material. I do know that in parts, I think, in Oxgangs Farm, some work was done, I think, through people doing what used to be called community service. I think they cleared it. But I noticed in the report, they said that you say that 50% of the city has had the footpaths cleaned in that way. How does that statistic look? How does that look in my ward or even the locality? What proportion has been cleared?
The deep cleanse of the streets was led by the street cleansing teams. We estimate there was 50%. Well, I've just recently got the figures. I didn't manage to get them together for this meeting to actually show the breakdown of which areas were cleaned. So all I can do is get that to you later on.
Okay, that would be really useful, because again, I think the reason the footpath, etc., it really does set the tone for the area. I got data, I think, from one of your colleagues today, which shows that in my ward, the weed killer people have only been in 3 days this year so far, and they've only done a tiny proportion of the streets, so there's still a lot of work to do. In parts of my ward, the weeds are knee-high along the edge of footpaths and stuff. So moving on to living landscapes, I think, talking about my ward again, I'm afraid, by and large, these grass amenity areas, which have been converted to living landscapes, are in the sort of Oxgangs, Firhill, Connolly Mains area, sort of former council housing stock, where people, just because of issues like weeds, etc., people feel that the area is a little bit unloved by the council, and the way that the landscape's been managed often adds to that narrative. Going back to the point that Councillor Corbett was making earlier, I think there's a big difference between grassland that you just let grow wild, essentially, and where the parks have actually chosen to install a wildflower meadow. I think the difference in value those two quite different things provides is absolutely huge, absolutely huge. And I know the wildflower meadow, it's not just a matter of scattering seeds, it does need some preparation and it does need a little bit of maintenance. But to me, I think it's worth us spending that a little bit more money up front, particularly on arterial routes, to put meadows in, which actually look better, they attract pollinators, etc. And I think that's something much better for us to aspire to, rather than just leaving the grass unmaintained, unloved.
Well, yeah, man after my own heart. That sounds fabulous. We'd love to do that. It is obviously a far more expensive operation, though. And that's, at the end of the day, what it comes down to. I mean, we could create very extensive wildflower meadows in key arterial routes, in big locations across the city, but we simply don't have the resource or the manpower to maintain those sort of sites, unfortunately. So that's why we have to go for a mix and match. So where we've tried to focus our wildflower meadows is in areas where they will get some impact and we know that they'll be successful. We'd like to extend that. We haven't really been able to do that over the last couple of years, simply because of resourcing implications. But so one way we're trying to overcome that is recognising that rather than having that annual cost of creating an annual or even a perennial meadow, one of the techniques we've looked at and started on is bulb planting in the long grass areas. So these will flower every year. We're looking for species that will flower when the grasses are at their longest. So that's late spring and summer. Not many species do that, so we've hunted high and low and we've trialled quite a few things. But I think we've planted almost 500,000 bulbs over the last couple of years and would want to continue doing that. That in itself has a cost, but it's a one-off cost. To create the type of meadows that you're talking about is an annual cost to us, and quite, at a very busy time of the year, quite an intensive manpower resource as well, because we need to prepare the ground, we need to kill off the weeds that are already there, which involves a herbicide as well, of course, and then we need to sow the meadows themselves.
So just one last point, Dennis, if you don't mind. So I think one of the issues in my ward is on Oxgating Road North, there's quite a large living landscaped area, and we hope to convert that to the wildflower meadow, but the consolation prize was to plant bulbs. But unfortunately, those bulbs haven't seeded, or whatever the term is, didn't germinate, and that's the word. And so we're left with, duck leaves and nettles and grass, which does not look great on a main road which cuts through my ward. I think, coming to a sort of bigger question though, so this is it's a centrally provided service, and I think the councillors here are all making points about how these policies could be better implemented to reflect the needs of their ward, or perhaps the locality. I do wonder, do you think perhaps this should be something that is run more by the locality rather than the centre of the council? Do you think that would deliver a better service to give people actually the landscape policies that they need?
I don't think it really matters where the grounds maintenance team is based. There are pros and cons whether you have a citywide service or a localised service. The current situation is we have a citywide service because that was seen as being the service that was able to deliver the level of savings that were required of the service. If you were to break that up again, you would have higher operational costs, I would imagine. I think it's more the communication and the engagement that was mentioned before from Councillor Corbett about Parks Friends groups, and we have 60 Parks Friends groups across the city. Most of them are superb and do a great job and do a lot of the additional work that traditionally a park service would have done but can no longer do. We're trying to widen them out of parks because actually there's more green space outside of parks than there's in parks. So looking at other green spaces as well, and we're very keen to encourage and support that type of activity. But it really comes down to working with people, finding out what people want, what works in certain places, what doesn't work, and altering that accordingly. That does take quite a while very often, and one also assumes that people want the same thing, and invariably they want very different things. So you've got all that to manage as well, of course. So what we're trying to create is a good mix of green spaces, so you can have formal recreation, but there's a lot of informal recreational opportunities through longer grass areas that ideally have an attractive appearance to them. And the means of doing that really is by adding colour and giving them a frame, clearing the litter out of them, so although they are naturalised, they don't look as though they've been abandoned. That's the trick. We haven't got it right everywhere, but I think every year it is getting better and better in locations.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a wee list of names